Hey, it's Elvis Duran. Just like you, I love listening to podcasts. Sort of like you're doing right now, right? But after you finish, when you're ready to hear the hits, I invite you to check out Z100, New York's #1 hit music station. We play the biggest songs from the biggest stars, like The Weeknd, Ed Sheeran, and Doja Cat. Listen live on Z100 in New York or wherever you are on our iHeartRadio app.
When COVID-19 hit, the doors to all independent venues across the country closed and attending live concerts stopped. The independent venues and promoters from every state in the U.S. are banding together to fight for survival. Many of us are at risk of closing our doors forever unless federal assistance is provided. More information is available at SaveOurStages.com. Brought to you by NEVA, a 501c6.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. Hello all, how are you doing today? Whenever you're listening to this, maybe it's like late at night, early in the morning, before your kids wake up, or maybe on the way to work or something like that. I'm glad. I've been getting a lot of feedback recently, as far as whether it's like listening to more podcasts during the pandemic and lockdowns and everything like that, or whether it's just the sheer act of creating a one-sided relationship with, a host of a podcast or, a band or whatever it is that you have this connective tissue with. I really like when people reach out to kind of pull those things together. It makes me happy because I'm glad that this podcast, brings you some peace of mind, some knowledge, whatever it is bringing you. I'm really thankful for that. So the guest this week, because we're talking about independent music, right? This is a big one for me. Russ Rankin from Good Riddance, who, if you don't know who Good Riddance are, like clearly you have been living under a rock. Probably one of the, more important bands from the pop punk, hardcore, whatever you want to call them, melodic hardcore. I think that's the most appropriate description. Band that has seeped through so many different areas of the independent music scene. And Russ is a great guy. And I know him on a personal level. Like him and I have done a lot of work when I was working over at PETA, because he is a very staunch animal rights advocate. And we did, our fair share of campaigns and other cool things together. And we actually talk about this in the interview. He always strikes me as a very serious dude, even though, every time I've hung out with him, it's been nothing but, pleasantries. But we had a great conversation. And Russ is an incredibly thoughtful dude and outspoken, and everything that you would imagine him to be, he is. And Good Riddance is such an important band, to so many of us. I definitely remember, like, when I first started getting into all the Fat Record stuff, and then listening to Good Riddance and kind of being like, they're a little bit different. They're not only sonically, but just, the messages that they were putting out there. So we get into all of that. So you can always email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. I always appreciate the reach out. I've been a little lagging for no other reason other than just time. And, sometimes when I respond to these, it's like over the weekend. And, I've just been really unplugging on the weekends, doing everything I can to, take care of my mental health and, just be present in the times with my family and everything else. So, yeah, but I promise I will get back to you. So 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. The best way that you can support this show, two things. One, tell your friends, because that is the best way that this show gets in other people's ear holes. And two is leave a review on whatever podcast catcher you are consuming this thing on, whether it's Apple Podcasts. Spotify's got no reviews, so don't worry about that. But, if you can leave a review, I would appreciate that. It helps out the show from a visibility standpoint. And what else? Like, we're all just first of all, wear a mask. Like, if you are not wearing a mask on a regular basis when you go out in the general public, you're doing something wrong. I'm sorry, but that's just the way that it is, in my opinion. And just take care of yourself and each other by wearing a mask. There's really no two ways about it. And I miss shows. Like, just I saw some news this week pop up that the Scotland and England, they're talking about starting up shows again, like of smaller venues, not arena shows or anything. And I'm like, well, it just seems so far off here in America, and I don't know when that's going to happen. But hopefully, you're doing everything you can to support independent music, and whether that's the bands, whether that's the venues. Just do something, because the less that we do as a community for this, the less that will be there when we're able to kind of return to this normal touring system, recorded music put out on tour and all that stuff. It's going to be drastically changed if we don't support these artists and bands during this weird time that we're all living in. So, anyways. Here is Russ. I can't wait to bring you this discussion. So, here it is, and I'll talk to you after the show's over.
I'm 39 years old, so I was in the complete sweet spot for all of the what I like to call the epiphat bands. Everything that obviously you guys were very much a part of. But it was Good Riddance was always interesting to me because, and I'm sure by me saying this, it will be of no surprise to you, but you guys are too punk to be hardcore and too hardcore to be punk, which you always kind of like were sitting on that fence, being able to exist in both worlds, but maybe people of a certain type would not fully embrace you. But considering that you guys always sat at that intersection, I presume that's the space that you personally kind of feel comfortable in, where it's like, oh yeah, like we are, a band that exists in both worlds, while not fully residing in one. I presume that is just kind of, commonplace for you guys right now, but was that something that, you kind of had to navigate that space as you were trying to figure out where you kind of sat?
I think that's a good question. I think that in hindsight, that like being the principal songwriter, I think I dragged my band like all over the map musically in a way that if I had it do over again, I probably wouldn't have done. I think that being on Fat and it being the mid 90s, we were directly influenced by bands like Bad Religion and Lagwagon and NoFX, bands that were sort of like in that moment were really big. And when we got on Fat Records, like suddenly we're listening to lots of Face to Face and Lagwagon and Propaganda, and so there was definitely a sort of a milieu that we were now a part of, that we felt sort of an unspoken obligation to parrot a little bit, which I don't think, nobody ever told us to, but we were like, oh, this is how we got to sound, because this is what music sounds like now. At the same time, later on, we went into a really different direction. We've also gone back to like a more polished pop sound. Like we've been all over the place, and I think some of our fans love that about us, but I think that it may have worked against us as far as being able to be a band that people could really like put their finger on. And if I think about bands that became more popular than we did, maybe that's something that they did. They had a defined sound and image, whereas we were sort of just like all over the place. So I think that our deal was being caught up in the mid 90s scene very much, but also being dudes who were heavily influenced by like Discharge and Conflict and the Cro-Mags and Sick of It All and Killing Time, and a lot of little music that was a little bit harder edged and maybe more political. So I think that's sort of how our hybrid came about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think it was like, as you start to understand the context of where kind of bands sit, like I think it was always interesting. Like, I mean, I put you guys and Ensign in that same weird category where it was like, I mean, Ensign came more rooted from the hardcore world, whereas you guys maybe came rooted more from the punk world. But then you both were kind of intersecting when obviously Ensign goes to Nitro because they, want to appeal to a more quote unquote punk crowd. And like those crowds, in the 90s, like were a little bit more divided from that perspective. And so I just always found it, a really interesting collision. I mean, not only because you guys played a lot of shows together, but that both bands were kind of doing, that sort of audience engagement, but to different levels and different levels of success from a quote unquote music business perspective. But I found that your guys' both of your paths to be very interesting from that perspective. Being a fan of both the bands, it was funny to kind of watch that kind of like, oh yeah, it's like the punk kids are maybe kind of liking Ensign and the hardcore kids are quote unquote allowed to like Good Riddance or whatever.
I think that our experience would dictate that the quote unquote punk crowds were a little more forgiving of some of the mixed bills. We always tried to book shows with bands that didn't sound just like us. Like we played a lot with Sick of It All. We played some shows with we played a ton of shows with Ensign, like you said. We played with Buried Alive. We played with Snapcase. So we liked playing those kind of bills. We liked trying to see if we could be exposed to some different people. And then also, maybe our fans would be able to check out a band like Snapcase who on their own they may not have listened to or been exposed to.
Totally.
And we had varied results, but I think overall it was something we enjoyed doing. And we met a lot of really cool people on the way. Mm-hmm. Like some really great people.
Of course. Yeah. You forge these lifelong relationships where, some bands, like you said, that are more kind of, tried and true to whatever their sound is and the lane that they stick in, might not have had the opportunity to do that just because, for a myriad of reasons. But yeah, I always thought that, you guys were unique from that perspective because, not only did you exist in this one world, but then, the fact that it's like, oh yeah, not only are we singing about politics, but, you yourself are, straight edge and vegan and like have all these other things that, other bands didn't, really have from that perspective. But we'll jump a little bit more into that later, but, kind of looking at you as a person, I know you were born and raised in the Santa Cruz area, and clearly, the Good Riddance could not fly the Santa Cruz flag a little bit more high. But what was your family structure like growing up? Like mom and dad in the house? Do you have brothers and sisters and that sort of stuff?
I had mom and dad and a brother that's 2 years younger than me. So it was just kind of a basic, maybe upper middle class thing. I mean, I remember just being, we never had a lot of like, we always had what we needed, but we never had anything extravagant or out of what I considered out of the ordinary. We never wanted for anything. My parents were pretty responsible, and they both came from really strong families. And so if you're asking about like, what was the struggle like growing up, it was pretty much like your basic thing, like issues with school, like, hey, I'm not working up to my potential, or I'm disruptive, or stuff like that. And then, but at home it was pretty chill. There wasn't anything major going on at home.
Yeah.
I was able to grow up with two parents that were there, and we were, we had everything that we needed, my brother and I, but we didn't have anything super extravagant. We had to, or there would be a carrot dangled, like you got to get these grades, or you got to, just the usual thing.
Sure. Right.
Like you'll get an Atari game system if you get like straight A's.
Sure.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a very nuclear family, as it were.
Yeah.
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 And, you being kind of the first on the scene, was there any sort of dynamic between you and your brother in regards to, him being the baby of the family and him getting away with more stuff? Or was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to presume too, that, you kind of going down the path that you did in regards to, the subculture that we're both involved in, did your parents kind of like understand what you were trying to accomplish, or were they just kind of bewildered by, you being the person that you are and, the bands that you started and stuff like that, just being like, what the hell is Russ doing?
I think the band stuff was sort of like a curious annoyance to them. And then once it became, modestly successful, I think they were proud of it. Like they were happy. Other than that, like, I dropped out of high school, and which a lot of people do, but my dad went to Princeton and my mom went to Cornell. So it wasn't that great of a decision in my house.
Yeah.
To drop out of high school.
Right. What did your parents do for a living?
My mom, when she was younger, lived in New York City and worked for a newspaper. But then she got married and didn't have a job. And then my dad was a lawyer.
Got it.
So my dad went to like Exeter Academy. He
Wow.
went to Princeton. He was an officer in the Navy, and then he went to law school in Berkeley, UC Berkeley. And my mom went to Cornell and was working in journalism. So I was supposed to be a lawyer. Like that was the plan. But
what sort of didn't pan out like that. What sort of law did your father practice? Was he in private practice, or was he doing other?
Private. Well, when my parents first moved to Santa Cruz, before I was born, he worked for the county. I think he worked in the public defenders. I don't know if he worked in the public defender's office or if he worked in the attorney general, the prosecutor's office.
Okay.
And then he worked for neither, but worked for the county as a lawyer. And then he had a private practice.
Got it.
So that most of my memories are he had a private practice.
Got it.
And he mostly did a lot of like probate law and stuff like that. Nothing too lascivious, just kind of basic stuff.
Right.
Nuts and bolts.
Right. Yeah. Spots and dots, whatever they call it.
Yeah.
I mean, most people would look at that sort of, upbringing in regards to the trajectory of, your household from a parent perspective, that it may have been strict because, anytime you have the, the military background, sometimes it's, enacted from the disciplining of the child and stuff like that. But it sounds like your father was, not, I guess, falling into that archetype.
No, yeah, he wasn't a military guy. Like he was an officer in the Navy, but it was more so like that was just what you did back then. And it wasn't, he wasn't like a gung ho military guy.
Got it.
He served and then he got out right before Vietnam. He tells a story where he was a officer on a submarine off the coast of Japan, and they had a bunch of dudes from the CIA on his submarine that wouldn't talk to anybody, and no one was allowed to talk to them, and they weren't allowed to know what they were doing. And they just had to keep sailing. They had to keep going up to close to the coast of Japan and then back out to sea and then back to the coast of Japan for about a month. He always tells that story.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, he has no idea what they were doing, but it was obviously something weird.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So something covert, as they say.
Yeah.
And so like you mentioned, when you dropped out of high school, did you drop out of high school like junior or senior year or?
Junior.
Okay. So what kind of, and like you said, there wasn't much, I guess, application from a schooling perspective towards you. But what kind of kid did you find yourself being as you started to, develop an identity? Were, you kind of that sort of rebellious punk rock nature was already kind of like hardwired in you? Or were you a sports dude? I mean, I know hockey has obviously been a part of your life for quite some time, but, how were you, I guess, identifying from, a high school perspective?
Like freshman and sophomore year, I was just a regular dude. Like I was a surfer. I skateboarded a little bit and smoked a lot of pot and kind of listened to reggae and whatever was on the radio. And then somewhere in my sophomore year, I also played in the Santa Cruz High marching band. I played snare drum, and one of my other snare drum players was a punker. In our school, we had like 2 or 3. He was one of them. And on a band trip. We were on this bus driving somewhere, and our marching band, and he had a boombox, and he played me Chemical Warfare by the Dead Kennedys. And that was the first time I'd ever heard punk, and that was it. I was hooked.
You're
I went
hooked.
out and bought. Yeah, I bought like 3 punk records the next day, and I just never looked back from that. So I became kind of a punker, but mostly identified as a skater at that point. I'm still surfing now and then, but I got really heavily into skateboarding.
Got it. Yeah, that's sometimes even though you live in a surf town, sometimes obviously skating is a much easier thing to do on a regular basis.
And also, like, I would read Thrasher magazine back then, and Thrasher magazine would always have, I think it was called Notes from the Underground or something. They had a section in their magazine where they would talk about punk bands and music and stuff. And so I would kind of look at that to see what record I should buy next. Like, oh, they mentioned this band, like that's a cool looking live photo. Lots of people stage diving. I'll buy that record. And then from there, I started reading Maximum Rock and Roll out of the Bay Area, and they would have their columnists would have their 5 to 10 favorite bands, and so that's kind of how I made the decisions to purchase new music, and I just started getting more and more into punk.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean the idea of self-discovery and turning over all these rocks where you all of a sudden find all these subgenres, and the discovery process when you're a kid is so cool because you are not bound by any sort of contextual relevance to these bands. I mean, you understand their importance, but like you're just consuming it all, and you're just like, I don't care if this is Discharge versus a band that's around right now. It's like you're drinking it all in by a fire hose.
Yeah, and this was 1983, maybe 84, and so. One of the cool things that happened early on was like the Maximum Rock and Roll, they would have scene reports. And so people would actually just write in from anywhere and say like, hey, I'm from like Bloomington, Minnesota, and this is what's going on here. Like this band played, this club is open. And then or even from like other countries around the world. And then Maximum Rock and Roll released a compilation album called Welcome to 1984. And that exposed me to bands from Finland, Brazil, Italy, South America, Canada, Europe, Germany, like all these places. And it was so cool. And it really began to feel like there was this like global uprising. I mean, it never amounted to much socio-politically, like tangibly, but it was kind of cool at that time. Reagan was president. It was not, nobody could imagine the world was going to last much longer than 2 or 3 more years. So it was kind of cool to feel like there was some sort of global awareness to be part of.
Totally. And that discovery of the world being bigger than not only your city or your state or your country, but then you start, like you said, you start to see the global impact that it's like you can just kind of close your eyes and picture that there are, so many other people that are your age that are, discovering this for the first time or, putting on these shows and like feeling like you actually have some autonomy and control over your life as opposed to, I got to follow this path or whatever. Yeah. You just start to feel, you feel like you have agency.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This may be me playing a little armchair psychologist on you, but you've expressed this in other interviews, but you're a serious dude. Like you're not the type of guy that's just like, hey, I want to be the center of attention, class clown sort of, vibe. And you joke around where it's just like, you don't smile when you play or whatever. Has that always kind of been who you are as far as like, you're not serious to the point where like you don't get a joke, but there is a certain tone that you obviously don't, resonate in. Has that always kind of been you as a person?
I don't know. This is a thing. This is a thing that you're bringing up that I'm not a stranger to. And that
Sure.
I've gone to see a therapist and stuff because at some point I just sort of like, I realized that everybody I came in contact with just thought I was this like joyless serious, like overly stoic person. And like, I know people who are center of the attention, gregarious, bouncing off the walls. Like, I don't know that that's really me, but I don't think that I'm the person that people think I am. And so but like, if enough people are saying it, like, there must be something there. And so it's ongoing, like me trying to figure out what that is. Like, I went to see a therapist to try to find out why I was so hard on myself, which is a part of that thing. And I saw this therapist once a week for like a year, and we never could crack it, because I never had anything bad happen at home, like, other than, expectations of me going down a certain path at home and then straying from that path. But I never suffered any sort of like blowback from my parents over it. I mean, they were obviously disappointed, but they were supportive of whatever I did, and they remained that way.
Yeah.
I think that so I don't really know. I think it's probably just ego, just self-centeredness, like being really, really overly worried about what people think of me. And maybe I think that I look stupid when I smile. I might have seen a picture or two at one point where I was smiling. I'm like, ew. I'm like,
you're like, that's not me.
Vowed to never do that.
Yeah.
Vowed to never do that again. Don't make that mistake.
Right.
It's probably has something to do with ego.
Hey, this is Sam Sumataro. I sing for a band called Drain from Santa Cruz, California. I'm here to tell you about our debut record called California Cursed, now available on Revelation Records. This summer, we're going on tour with Go to revelationrecords.com for more. And here's 4 seconds of what we sound like. I'm stoked to be part of the Revelation family. Let's take the remaining 26 seconds to dive into what it means and what's up at Rev. Revelation kicked things off in New York City in 1987 with Warzone, Lower East Side Crew. After that, Gorilla Biscuits, Youth of Today, Judge, Inside Out, Chain of Strength, and many more. The times changed in the early 90s, and Rev was there, with artists like Quicksand, Texas is the Reason, Farside, and Into Another. There's new music from World Be Free, Constant Elevation, Urban Sprawl, Dare, and reissues of the classics from Inside Out, Side by Side, and Orange 9mm. Check out the Spotify playlist series. It's all at revelationrecords.com.
The always ready for breakfast deal.
Going to bed already?
Yep. Breakfast at Mickey D's tomorrow.
So?
Sooner I go to bed, sooner it'll be morning. Sooner I'll be at Mickey D's.
This is actually brilliant.
You can come too. Turn out that light.
There's a deal for every breakfast strategist at McDonald's. Start your morning with a $3 bagel breakfast sandwich, available only in the app. Offer valid 1/2 through 1/15/23 at participating U.S. McDonald's. Valid one time per day. McD app download and registration required.
Hey, it's Elvis Duran. Just like you, I love listening to podcasts. Sort of like you're doing right now, right? But after you finish, when you're ready to hear the hits, I invite you to check out Z100, New York's #1 hit music station. We play the biggest songs from the biggest stars, like The Weeknd, Ed Sheeran, and Doja Cat. Listen live on Z100 in New York or wherever you are on our iHeartRadio app.
Is Good Riddance ostensibly your first band? Like, I know that sounds weird to say, but did you play at any other kind of iterations before Good Riddance began?
Yeah, I started playing with some friends of mine. Like my childhood best friend, who I grew up, we were neighbors, and I mean, I've known him since we were in the crib together. He was playing drums, and then he had a couple of friends in high school. I'm a year older than him, and he found a guitar player and a bass player, and they were jamming. But they weren't really punk. They were playing like AC/DC and stuff like that. But he introduced me to them, and I told him I would sing for him if they played Sex Pistols covers.
Nice.
And
You're
so,
like, my requirement is this.
I tried to mold him into a fierce Sex Pistols cover band, and that was kind of what we did. We would play parties once in a while, but it was very much like alcohol fueled and not very serious. And then I got sober, and that was still going on, but I realized I wanted to to take it a little more seriously. Started looking for something else.
Got it. And with the sobriety, I was going to hit about that a little bit later. I guess what prompted you, was it just kind of the idea of the, sort of self-destructive path that people kind of go down with that, and you recognized yourself kind of headed down that way, or was there, other factors that kind of led you there?
I think that I really don't know. Like I used to like it. And then also being a punker back then, that was all there was. Like I didn't know that you could be into that kind of music and not be fucked up.
Sure.
I didn't have any, like, I thought you had to be Darby Crash or you couldn't be punk. And I can remember, but being an alcoholic, like it just got bad. It got worse and worse and worse. It never got any better. It wasn't like, oh, I had a bad weekend and then a fun weekend. It just went from recreational to pathological pretty quickly. And then at the end, it was just really sad. And I remember thinking to myself that if it got really bad, I would stop. And then it got really bad, and I made the decision to stop and drank anyway. And I was like, well, fuck, now what do I do?
Right.
And I can also remember, like, I was listening to all kinds of punk and hardcore music, and I can distinctly remember, like, sitting there with my bottle of peppermint schnapps, listening to Uniform Choice, and reading these lyrics about being drug and alcohol free, and like thinking, like, wow, these lyrics make a lot of sense as I swig on my bottle of schnapps.
Yeah.
So there was the idea of a different lifestyle was there in front of me. Like, there was bands that I was listening to, Uniform Choice, Used to Say, 7 Seconds, bands like that, SSD, Minor Threat. But I just didn't really know that they were cool songs and the lyrics were great, but I didn't really think that people lived that way.
Right. No, that's a really important point, because I think until you recognize that there is a proverbial path forward with that, practice of, self-discipline or whatever you want to call it. You feel like, that they're maybe writing these songs in the context of just like, try to be a point of inspiration, as opposed to like, oh, they actually live their life like that. Because, like you said, you've got no context for it. You're just like, these are songs and cool lyrics, but it's not rooted in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess a simple answer to the question that I originally asked you, like, Good Riddance is kind of like your first more quote unquote serious band where you obviously got out there, which is funny to think about, because usually you have to play in like, 5 or 6 terrible bands before, and play local shows on the weekends and stuff like that before you can kind of, get to something a little bit more serious.
Yeah, it was just that, like the band that I was telling you about, like, that eventually morphed into Good Riddance, being that, like, that drummer was the guy that played on our first album on Fat, played on Forgotten Country. But it was more so like just cycling through members. And then once our guitar player, Luke, joined in 1990, and he was, at that point, he was a sober guy, and he was super driven and serious about playing music and writing original songs and playing out of town. So he and I were like-minded. And once we were together in a band, it was, we began to take it really seriously. So we kept, we had that drummer, but we cycled through, a second guitar player, several of them, a couple of bass players, until we found the right mix. And then we spent about 2 or 3 years just working our asses off. We played everywhere we could. We recorded all our new songs that we could. We sent demos everywhere. So we were kind of in the right place at the right time, and we're very busy when Fat Records was just starting out. So
yeah,
it's fortunate.
And was the, I guess, like, like you said, with the fact that, you dropped out of high school, and like you, I presume the idea of being like, oh, I'm going to be in a full-time punk band, like that doesn't, that didn't make sense. Like that was not something that you could, like, connect to being, a sustainable piece of living or anything like that. So was it one of those things that, as you started to, as Good Riddance started to be, busy and stuff like that, was it still just like, oh yeah, like, I'm going to work at a bagel shop and just tour, and then when I come home, I'll work and stuff like that. Yeah. That was
yeah, it was like having two jobs full time and only getting paid for one. I mean, we toured up to Seattle and back, and we toured out to Houston, Texas and back on just a demo tape, tours that like Luke and I basically financed out of pocket, and we lost money just to get out and try before we were on Fat. And I remember when our first album came out on Fat, and we went to Europe for the first time, and had suddenly all these, tours start stacking up and all these opportunities. And we all looked at each other and we were like, we're going to have to quit our jobs. And we were terrified.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know what would happen.
I'm excited to tell you about a new release from a band called Avatar coming out at E1 on August 7th. The record is called Hunter Gatherer. So you can, go quickly pre-save that on any, streaming platform of your choice. But the band got keyed into me, and I watched a video. I streamed their music. It was one of those things where I had never heard of them before, frankly. And after kind of getting to know them a little bit, I was like, these dudes are going for it. Like, it's very theatrical. It's heavy. It's got a lot of stuff going on, but I mean that in a good way. Like, let me just sample a little bit of the music for you, and you can kind of, get a feel for it. So here it is. The song is called Silence in the Age of Apes. It's off this upcoming record of theirs. So check it out, and I'll come right back. Pretty crazy, right? Like I said, they just, they throw everything at you. And they're dudes in their mid-20s. Like, they've been doing this for a while, but they have such a clear and concise vision for what they want to do musically. So, again, the band is called Avatar. Their record is called Hunter Gatherer. Comes out August 7th. So pre-save it now. Pre-order it. Do whatever it is that you need to do to support this band. Visit avatarmetal.com for all of that information. Okay? Thank you very much, E1.
Yeah, I mean, especially too, because it's like, even though, that was around the time where you could see some bands becoming successful, obviously, your Rancid, Green Days, and Offsprings and stuff like that, but they're, that wasn't something that you could like pin your hopes and dreams on. So I totally get the fear where you guys were probably operating from.
I think there was the fear of regretting not doing it later outweighed the fear of like not being able to pay rent or keep the lights on. So we just went for it.
Yeah, sure. No, that totally makes sense. It's like, well, there's no time like the present. Things are going all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess when you started to, get up there and sing and, play in front of people, was that a difficult task for you? Not just from like the singing perspective, but just like, any sort of like stage fright or, putting yourself out there. Was that difficult at the beginning, or did you kind of just like, well, I got to do it, obviously?
I don't recall any kind of issue with that. I don't think I was like super comfortable. Like, I don't think that my personality type dovetails nicely into being the center of attention, but I also don't recall any sort of like anxiety or anything like that.
Sure. And then how was your, relationship with the business of the band? Like, obviously, once these things started to become more serious, and like, signing with, Fat and touring and, booking agents, and you guys were starting to, get paid money for this stuff. Was it something that you were comfortable with dealing with, or is it something that you kind of tried to distance yourself and let some of the other members kind of, take control of that?
The second thing. Like, I don't understand business really that well, and there's a lot of things that happen with a band in that situation, and I'm sure we aren't the only ones. And where like I really wish there was like a class that you went to. Like, here's what to expect now that you're a working band. We made a lot of mistakes just out of ignorance, and just had to kind of learn a lot of things the hard way. And so, but eventually it works out, and there's enough people that have done it longer or at a higher level that we could sort of reach out to, who are resources for us, who would be like, oh, this, like, yeah, that happened to us. Like, here's what we did. So currently, and for a while, like even before our break, and then since 2012 when we started playing again, Luke, our guitar player, is sort of manages the money and the bank account and the LLC and all that stuff. And then Chuck, our bass player, handles all of our booking agents and being liaison with them. So like, I don't do anything except write songs and interviews.
Well, I mean, that's an important, I think once you realize, like, by default, so many people kind of look to the singer to be like, oh yeah, that's the business person of the band. And, some of it gets foisted upon people that have no interest in that, no proclivity, no, like you said, no business mindedness. So it's cool that you were able to at least understand that of yourself and be like, oh yes, like I'm not good at that at all. Like, how about this other person handles this or whatever?
Yeah, it never even was suggested that I would be the one. So so we sort of fell into these roles, and for the other guys, they're kind of thankless, but we've worked out a system where like band money goes more to like Luke and Chuck get paid more than I do because they're actually putting in like office type work outside of touring and playing music. So to compensate their time and all the work that they do. Luke's also in charge of ordering merchandise too. So he's got a lot of band stuff on his plate when we're going. But what we do is we pay those guys accordingly so that there's no feeling of like, man, I'm doing all this extra work.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's better
it's equitable.
Have their time is valuable, and they do a lot of work that's not real glamorous or fun. And so I think it's important for them to feel like there's some compensation there for them.
That's honestly very forward thinking, just because it usually, like or like you were saying, where when people kind of fall into these roles and people just kind of start doing stuff, you don't really think about those things. But so that's like been the case kind of like for the existence of the band, or is that something that you guys kind of tweaked as the responsibilities became more clear?
Yeah, we tweaked it as the responsibilities became more clear, and also when it became apparent how much time they were spending on that, and in order to allay some type of resentment growing, which if I was in their position and I was putting in all this extra work and getting paid the same amount as me or our drummer who aren't doing this work, I wouldn't like it. So
sure, yeah.
It works out. So like it makes them hopefully makes them feel appreciated for what the extra work that they're doing, but also like it compensates their time because it is a lot of work.
Sure.
It is a lot of work.
Right. The skin is in the game for everybody, from that perspective.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I do a lot of work. I do a lot of work writing songs, but like that's bundled into royalty payments and publishing and stuff. So like I'm taken care of for that. But the things that those guys do, there's no like metric worked into record sales for that.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it's kind of the nuts and bolts of keeping the functionality of the band going. So yeah, no, I appreciate you spelling it out like that. I'm going to presume too that kind of, as you guys started to, once you release your first and second record, and like as the idea of independent music being a commoditizable thing, from a major label perspective, do you have any funny or anecdotal stories of kind of those weird big business things kind of coming into the into the band's orbit? Did you guys kind of like take those meetings just because it was like, well, it's here, we might as well try it out, from a meeting perspective, or was that something that you guys just never even kind of entertained to begin with?
We never entertained it to begin with, and we never took any meetings with anybody.
But there had to, but I presume that there was interest at some point, like maybe people reached out or anything like that, or am I just completely, putting the cart in front of the horse?
I mean, my ego wants to tell you that, yeah, they were beating down our door, but the truth is that nobody ever really approached us.
Got it. I just, the only reason I mentioned that or asked that is just because, it is, bands of a certain time kind of get these, weird opportunities that might not normally exist outside the context, whatever. It's like Anti-Flag or, these other bands that are obviously, your peers.
It happened. It happened to friends of ours. Like, we heard stories, like we've been in talked to a lot of our peers about it, but it never happened to us, either because we were just not quite on the level of those bands, or maybe because of our whole aesthetic that major labels just thought, what's the point? I really don't know.
Yeah. No, for sure.
At one point it was happening to so many people that you started to feel left out if there wasn't an A&R guy trying to be your friend.
Right.
But
right.
no, it never happened. It never happened to us.
As always, this podcast is brought to you by Rockabilia, the best place to buy band merch on the internet, as far as I'm concerned. Use the code PC100words. That gets you 15% off your order. And trust me, you go on their website, it can feel overwhelming at the very beginning because they have so much stuff. And it is all amazing, high quality, non-bootleg material, all stuff that is paid out to the bands. And I can't put an emphasis on that enough, but it breaks my heart into a million pieces when you see terrible bootleg merch that just, goes out the door. People are wearing it and they don't even understand that the bands are getting ripped off in real ways around that. Rockabilia is located in the Midwest, so they ship your stuff ASAP and it'll get to you in 2 to 4 days. I like how I'm guaranteeing their shipping time. Like I work in their warehouse, but it's quick shipping, amazing customer service if you have any issues, which I frankly never have, and I've ordered from them many times. So again, use the code PC100words. That will get you 15% off your order. Rockabilia is an independently owned company. Support them just like you're supporting your favorite bands and your local venues. Everybody needs the support during this weird time. So go do that. PC100words, 15% off your order.
Hey, it's Elvis Duran. Just like you, I love listening to podcasts. Sort of like you're doing right now, right? But after you finish, when you're ready to hear the hits, I invite you to check out Z100, New York's #1 hit music station. We play the biggest songs from the biggest stars, like The Weeknd, Ed Sheeran, and Doja Cat. Listen live on Z100 in New York or wherever you are on our iHeartRadio app.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I do think you probably kind of hit the nail on the head where maybe, people didn't know what to do, again, with kind of where to fit you guys in. Not only were you, this sort of band sonically, but then it's well, they're also, really politically outspoken and, we can't market that to, whatever your typical Midwestern person that might strung out or something like that.
That's what I'll choose to tell myself.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'll create that narrative for you, Russ.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. And as you started to kind of see the band towards the end of its original tenure in regards to touring, kind of becoming less and less because when you guys were obviously hitting it hard, you were playing 200 plus shows a year. And most people obviously would look at you being like, oh yeah, that's Russ from Good Riddance. And you kind of get tied up into that. Was it, I guess, was it difficult for you to kind of, transition sort of out of the touring life into more, and I'm using air quotes here, real life? Or was that something that you were, I guess suited for or, made out to be that this wasn't some traumatic thing for you?
It was somewhere in the middle. I think that we'd made the decision to stop playing, based on a number of factors. It wasn't like we got in a fight and broke up. It was looking at the musical landscape and what was happening with our most recent release and touring and seeing the writing on the wall kind of. And we'd played shows with bands who we had respected, who were older, who were sort of going through that, the Puppet Show and Spinal Tap thing. And we didn't want to, we definitely did not want to be that band. And so we thought we could walk away with some grace and dignity on our own terms and be like, well, that we got to do a really cool thing. And it was an awesome ride and moving on to the next thing. Plus guys in my band were at that point married and starting families. And And we would all, most of us had day jobs by then because we weren't able to tour as much, because one guy in the band had decided to go back to school in the early 2000s, which put a big dent in our touring schedule anyway. So it was kind of like, by the time we were done in 2007, I was relieved and happy to move on to something else. And I was playing in another band at that time too.
Sure.
Who, we were modestly busy, and it was kind of a cool, interesting experience to be able to do that with a different group of people. And it was also, I think, valuable for me to gain that perspective, because I think that you make a good point when you're like, hey, that's so-and-so from that band, like becoming identified with that, and pinning all of my my sense of self on something that I can't control is kind of a dangerous proposition in hindsight. Like, good show, like I'm awesome. Bad show, I'm the worst person in the world. Vanessa used to send me reviews of our band, of our albums, and I had to just stop reading them after a while, because there would be like 50 good ones and then one bad one, and it would ruin my week. Sure. And so like going on that roller coaster ride where like I'm pinning my complete sense of self onto this mechanism of which I am only one part of, like I can't control it, was becoming taxing. And I didn't see it at the time, but I think the break gave me some perspective to be like, oh yeah, like it's just a band, like thousands of others. And we were not the biggest band in the world. We were not the smallest band in the world. We just were. And what a cool opportunity it was, and how grateful to have had that opportunity and that experience. So I think the break helped me to sort of make Good Riddance right-sized for me.
Yeah.
Which was really valuable.
Totally. Yeah. No, it gave you perspective, because I think that, when you're on the proverbial hamster wheel of, put out a record, tour for 18 months, write a new record for 2, like you're just in the middle of it, and you have no way of actually having a healthy relationship with your artistic output in your band. And so it's cool that you were able to kind of see all that in motion as you were, distancing yourself from obviously being on the road and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was really good. It was a good experience. And it's really informed like Good Riddance post 2012. So like you get 4 dudes that are a little bit older and wiser and have all had this sort of same experience to have the band be right sized in the 5 years we didn't play. And so you get 4 guys that are just super grateful for any opportunity to play and travel and no longer caught up in the day to day. Like, it's crazy the things that I would think about, and like the imagined competition with my peers, the obsession about like how many people came to this show versus the same venue last time, or like how many people came to this other band's show last week compared to our show. Like, getting caught up in that is just a nightmare. So I'm grateful that we don't have that anymore.
Yeah. Well, now it actually gets to be like, probably how it was obviously at the very beginning, where you're just like, hey, oh wow, we get to play some shows. Like, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like some of the like personality conflicts in the band, while like based on what I've, talking to peers and stuff, like our band over the years, we had our issues, but we never pulled over on the side of the road to fist fight each other or anything like that. Like I've seen and heard of some way crazier things that never happened to us. But like our interpersonal relationship with each other now is so much more chill. Like I said, it's just like, man, we get to do this, not like we have to, like we get to do this. Like, this is really cool.
Yeah. It's
made the whole thing just more enjoyable for me.
Yeah, no, that's special. 'Cause these things are opportunities rather than obligations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Two last things I want to hit on before I let you go. Clearly no interview that you have ever done could be, not mention hockey. Like, it's so funny because, it's like, hey, everyone's just like, dude, you're a hockey scout. Like, that's so crazy. And like, it's a cool job. And obviously it's a unique angle. The thing I wanted to kind of pull the thread on for that is the fact that there was always, up until arguably, I would say, late 90s, early 2000s, was this real division between, being a punk and hardcore kid versus being a sports person. Like, you kind of had to secretly, kind of keep that under wraps because it was like, the jock mentality and all that sort of stuff. Did you ever find that for yourself where it's like, even though hockey is obviously not the same sort of context as like, a football or baseball player in regards to that, jock mentality, was that something that you kind of had to like navigate where it's like, okay, here's my hockey fandom, and then, here's me as a person as far as like within the, context of the punk scene, as it were, or did you just not care?
I think I didn't care, and I also didn't really run up against it that much. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like Dead Kennedy's had a song called Jocko-Rama, and there's, a bunch of things like that. But then there's also, a whole bunch of hardcore bands that sort of adopted an athletic look who kind of looked like jocks. I don't know if that was just out of happenstance or what, but, and I also think that like I know a guy named Scott who sings for a band called Pulley. He used to sing for 10 Foot Pole, and he was
Scott Radinsky,
a major league. He was a major league pitcher.
Yep.
And I'll bet you nobody ever like went up to him in a show and like, you're a fucking jock, you suck. Like, people probably went up to him and were just like, oh, that's so cool. So I think it's one of those things where people will talk badly about it when they're around their friends, but if they were alone with Wayne Gretzky, they'd probably be pretty fucking stoked to like meet him.
Totally.
And they wouldn't be like, I'm not going to shake your hand, you're a fucking jock. Like, I just don't think people operate that way. At least that's been my experience. And I also think that one of the things that appealed to me about hockey was it's a lot like punk rock. Like, and granted, like, I don't live in Canada, so I didn't grow up with it, but like it's underground and it's kind of like on the fringe, and it's not for everybody. Like, it's really fast, it's really violent, and it's really colorful, just like punk rock is. And so I always thought it had a perfect place, in that sort of milieu. But again, if you talk to people in Canada, a lot of times, like the football player jocks that I dealt with in high school, like in Canada in high school, you dealt with hockey playing jocks, I think. So,
right.
I'm sure, like, cause I'm engaged, the woman I live with, she's Canadian, and she's like, yeah, in high school, like all the guys that I couldn't stand were hockey players. So I get it to an extent. I get it. But I also think that most of the time it hasn't been a problem. Like, and whenever we've toured Canada, the punkest dude at the show is still willing to talk hockey with me and knows everything about everything.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So like they'll come to the show, like they're punkers and they're cool and all that. But like if you ask them about like hockey, they'll talk hockey with they'll talk hockey with me. They all do.
Right. No, it's
so it's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's cool. They're like, yo, how are the San Diego Gulls this year? It's like, yeah, you're like, okay, I guess we're doing this.
They kind of look around and make sure their cover's not going to get blown. But like, I mean, people that love hockey, they love it. And in Canada, for Canadians, a lot of times it's like, it brings up like, Saturday nights watching TV with their grandpa. It brings up a lot of good things that people don't want to let go of.
Yeah.
And so I think it's culturally, it's kind of like a landmark that everybody can sort of point out and speak to. But
right.
I love the game. I love everything about it. And I don't really care if it's not cool.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree. I mean, yeah, you've always, been very vocal about that. But like I said, I was just, curious of your experience with that, but it's cool that you obviously haven't had to, any of those negative experiences where people, have come at you just like, dude, why do you like sports so much? It's just like, what are you talking about, dude? So it's cool. The last thing I want to hit on was the, kind of what we were talking about, a little towards the beginning where, clearly Good Riddance has always been a, political band, and you've always expressed your, veganism and, being straight edge, and you've been it for a very, very long time. And you've observed all of the, ebbs and flows in both, the straight edge movement and obviously, the animal rights movement. Do you, considering it's so important to you, both things, veganism and straight edge, do you kind of reflect on the changes that you have seen sort of incrementally, or is it something you try to view, holistically, where it's like, oh man, when I first, became vegetarian and vegan, some 30 years ago, this is where it was. I guess, how does it kind of like sit in your brain, or do you just kind of try to focus on, what you are doing as an individual?
I think what you're asking is it, do I think more in the macro, or do I think about like just myself and how it manifests in my life?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
That you said it in a much better way than I did. So thank you, Russ.
I think that it's kind of cool because I take for granted things nowadays that I've forgotten about. Like, and when we first started touring, like our bass player was vegan, and our guitar player is vegetarian, and I was vegan, and there was no internet really. There was no Whole Foods. So we would roll into towns, and we had this book by Linda McCartney, this really sketchy, like vegetarian guide to North America that Linda McCartney had put out, I think. So we'd try to find those places, or we'd get to the venue and we'd be sound checking, and like some kids would show up either with stuff they cooked themselves, or like to take us to like the local hippie co-op place in that town. Or we'd go to an ISHCON center and get free vegetarian food. So like, it was, the landscape for touring as a vegan or vegetarian back then was a lot different and required a lot of work. But at the time we didn't think of it that way. We were just like, well, this is how it is. And it was sort of cool to meet people that way and discover each town's like little co-op or vegan restaurant or, thing like that. Also, Starbucks didn't have soy milk, and now Starbucks has soy, almond, coconut, whatever you want. And now you can go to every town, and there's, if you wanted to, you could go to Carl's Jr. and get a vegan burger now.
Yep.
Not that I would do that, but like the fact that exists is pretty, in the macro, that's pretty cool. And there's Whole Foods, there's tons of health food restaurants, there's Happy Cow, there's tons of apps that'll show you exactly where to go. So it's way different. And that's why when I'm entertaining my Instagram trolls all day long, it's crazy when people are like, oh, it's so hard, I could never do that. It's like, dude, you don't even know how easy it is now.
Right.
You can't walk out your door without running into a place where you could get vegan food. So it definitely was a struggle, but it wasn't like, oh, poor me, this is hard. It was like, this is the decision that we've made for ourselves, and so let's do what we got to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's way easier now.
Yeah.
And it's not even like, back then it was sort of a weird fringe thing. Like you were weird if you're a vegetarian, let alone vegan back then. And now veganism is in the lexicon so much more. Like everybody knows somebody who's vegan or who's trying it or plant-based or something like that. And there's commercials on TV for like soy milk and almond milk. And I mean, it's like, it's madness.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, for sure. Yeah. It is interesting to, watch these movements, kind of change and morph. And then, they're, on one hand, you don't want to be cynical where it's just like, oh yeah, this is the only reason that it is this is because people can make money off it. But, if it is obviously creating the greater benefit for, everybody holistically, it's like, well, that's okay then. If you have to follow the money, then follow the money. And it's like, I would rather follow the money towards a sustainable future than, well, yeah.
Like if I'm an investor and I'm an animal rights activist, like I'm all in for Beyond Meat. Cause like, hey, this is a thing that's going to be successful and is awesome and is making things better. and it'll make me money if I'm an investor. So like,
Yeah.
whereas most of the time when you're an investor, you're kind of like, you're holding your nose and you're buying stock in something that you're just sort of like, whatever, like it looks okay. Whereas like if you're an animal rights person, like now there's stocks that you can absolutely 100% get behind.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Yeah, for sure.
Not that the stock market matters, to most people, but like I'm just saying, like as an example of how different things are.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. It's not like you could have, invested in raw tofu in the 80s with nutritional yeast.
Although I would have loved, man, if you could have invested in nutritional yeast like 50 years ago, I'd be sitting pretty.
Oh, absolutely, dude. Fake cheese before it was fake cheese.
Yep.
Well, I could go on with you for a while, but I'm not going to. We'll just start our own separate podcast for that. But thank you so much, Russ. I really appreciate you hanging out with me.
So that was Russ. Thank you very much to Vanessa, his publicist, for helping set this up. And thank you to Russ because, he donated his time to this show. And I appreciate that immensely. So check out Good Riddance. Like, if you have not listened to them in general, just do it, because they not only are their newer records really good, but Forgotten Country and everything that is classic Good Riddance, it still holds up and is still potent. And I love the band so much. So next week we have a great discussion with Corey Kaufman from Gleamer. And if you are not hip to Gleamer, just do your research right now. Stream both of their LPs. They are a great shoegaze, atmospheric band, just so good. Like, it's one of those records that, especially their newest one, that I can listen to, like, once it's over, I'm just like, well, I'll just listen to that whole thing again. So we had Corey, the brainchild behind Gleamer, and we talk, because that's what we do in the podcast. So anyways, until then, please be safe, everybody.
Hey, it's Elvis Duran. Just like you, I love listening to podcasts. Sort of like you're doing right now, right? But after you finish, when you're ready to hear the hits, I invite you to check out Z100, New York's #1 hit music station. We play the biggest songs from the biggest stars, like The Weeknd, Ed Sheeran, and Doja Cat. Listen live on Z100 in New York or wherever you are on our iHeartRadio app.